Hey everybody, today we're going to take a look and see how biased the polling was for the 2024 presidential election. In the past, we've done it for 2016 and 2020, and in general, we know those pretty heavily overestimated Hillary and Biden, they underestimated Trump, and I frequently heard the polling should not underestimate Trump a third time. The pollsters have made their adjustments. They're going to be a lot closer. So let's see what we've got for the accuracy. So I've got the US map up here, and these numbers are not the electoral votes. These are how far off the polls were in each state. Now, before we go through it, a couple of things to mention. First, some states just did not really have any data leading up to the election. So if it was from 6 months ago or something in that direction, I decided it would be unhelpful to use that data. So we're going to color those states yellow. There were also a couple of states that had just maybe one poll a month or two before the election. I think that's very minimally helpful, but on those few states, we are going to use that data. Now, the other thing to mention is I took most of this data from the average of the aggregates on Wikipedia. I also sometimes had to go to 538. So this did take some time to go through every state to try to get accurate data. There's always going to be some inconsistencies, but I think I'm satisfied with the map I was able to make. And finally, some states used only the head-to-head data between Trump and Harris, even though there might have been additional candidates on the ballot. And other states did use the multi-candidate polling, but for most of those states, there was just way less of those polls. So nothing is going to be perfect, but to try to keep it consistent, I went for the head-to-head matchups because there was just a lot more of those polls. A lot of those polls also did have an option for other, so that should cover most of these outcomes. So let's get into this map. And the way we're going to do the shading is, if there was a 1-point bias, we're going to say that's a tilt, and we're going to shade that accordingly. The next level up is going to be a 2 to 3-point bias, then 4 to 5 points, and finally the worst offenders are going to be errors of 6 or more points. Those are going to be the darkest colors. So you might do it differently, that's fine. But first here, let's start with the 6 states that I just did not have enough data to fill in. It's going to be Idaho, Hawaii, Louisiana, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Alabama. Also, we could throw Washington, D.C. in there. So to be as fair as I can, we're just not going to use those states. Those are very safe states. I guess they just decided they didn't really want to poll there. Next up, let's go to the states that had absolutely no polling errors. Now keep in mind, I did have to round these, so some of these could be off by up to a half a point, but the best states are actually going to be Washington, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, and Maryland. Those 5 states rounded to a 0-point miss. Very impressive stuff. Those are different states scattered across the country. I'm sure a lot of that is luck, but hey, you got to give credit where it's due, even if they happen to luck into it. Next, let's go to the states that had very little bias of just 1 point. We're going to start with the ones that were in favor of Kamala Harris or otherwise underestimated Donald Trump. We've got Montana, Colorado, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Virginia, and in the Sun Belt, Georgia. Again, not every one of those states had a ton of polls, but from what I could find, they did have some fantastic accuracy. They all underestimated Trump, but it was by nothing remotely significant. Now we've got one state that underestimated Harris. Let's plug that one in. It's going to be Utah. Again, great accuracy here, just a very slight underestimation of Harris. So now we can move up to the states that had a 2 to 3-point bias. That's low, but it could be consequential in a close race. So let's do the ones that underestimated Donald Trump. We'll start in Alaska. Then we've got Nevada, Arizona, Wyoming, Minnesota, then the whole Rust Belt, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio, Delaware, North Carolina, and then in the Northeast, we've got New Hampshire. Those Rust Belt states were all won by Trump. They were not off by as much as we've seen in the past, but given how close they were, even a 1 or 2-point miss, that's the entire election. So we're also starting to see a pattern here. By far, almost every one of these states has underestimated Trump. Now, we do have one state here that actually did overestimate Trump by 2 to 3 points. That's going to be on the West Coast. That's Oregon. This state could have benefited from some more polling, but from what I could find, it was a low underestimation of Harris's support. Next, let's go to the median biases. These are going to be 4 to 5-point misses, and every one of these did underestimate Trump. So we'll go West Coast to East, we've got California, then South Dakota, Nebraska, and for Nebraska and Maine, that's just going to be the state at large. That was just much easier to do than to try to break it up by congressional district. Then we've got Missouri, Illinois, then in the Northeast, it's going to be Maine. And finally, New York, only a 4-point miss there. You might think it would be more given how far it swung toward the right, but the miss there was not extremely significant. So that's another big mix of states. Some places like South Dakota, again, they had very few polls, but a 4 or 5-point miss, especially if it's in the aggregate with a lot of different pollsters, that is actually a problem and a clear underestimation, especially if it's all going in one direction. But let's finish it up here with the most egregious offenders. These are going to be states where the underestimation was by 6 or more points. And you guessed it, every one of these underestimated Trump, they overestimated Harris. Let's go through them. We could start in North Dakota. Now, even though that's a gigantic miss, it is a very red state. It really got almost no polling attention. It was almost unfair to include it, but from what I could find, that's how bad it underestimated Trump. It was a similar story in Kansas. There was really only one poll there, and with registered voters, it only showed Trump up by 5. He won it by 16. That's an 11-point underestimation of Trump's support. That is highly embarrassing. After that, we've got Texas, another big underestimation of Trump's support there by 6 points. In Iowa, he was underestimated by 8. A big part of that explanation is going to be that Seltzer poll that showed Harris up by 3. That skewed the averages. The other polls showed pretty much a comfortable win for Trump. Then we've got Arkansas, another 16-point miss, but again, not the best data in a very red state. Then it's going to be Tennessee, Florida, it's another 6-point miss, South Carolina, West Virginia, and the last state here is going to be New Jersey that had an 8-point underestimation of Trump's support. That was likely the biggest surprise shift for most people. So that's it. Based on this is another complete wipeout for the polling industry. Scattered across the states, that's a 174-point underestimation of Trump's support, just 3 for Kamala Harris. A few states were very good, and the polling overall in the states that mattered wasn't off by that much. But again, 1, 2, maybe 3 points that ended up determining the winner. So the pollsters, I don't think they really made enough adjustments. It's pretty clear if you look at this. And once you're off by 5 or 6 points, it really starts to come off as you don't know how to read the electorate. That's 3 elections in a row where Trump was underestimated. It's going to be really nuts to see what the polling is going to show in the next election where Trump is not running again. I don't think anybody knows what to expect. They didn't do the worst here, but let's face it, they just did not do good enough. There's been a lot of mistrust of the polling industry, and after seeing 3 in a row like this, I don't blame anybody. These are supposed to be the pros. They're supposed to know what they're doing and have enough data to paint some kind of an accurate picture. But I think a lot of people are just going to view it as broken, and they're not going to trust any polls going forward. So again, some of these numbers could be a little bit different depending on which data you want to use, but they should all be at least within a 1-point accuracy. So that's it. Some hits and some misses, but this is how accurate the polling was in the 2024 presidential election. So let me know in the comments, what do you make of any of the polling in any of these states? How about the states where they were accurate again, like in Georgia? And how are you going to trust the polling in the midterms and the next presidential election? Let me know down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.